Are we on live? Yes, we are. Thank y'all for being here. We're going to talk about budget balancing, budget busting, and how much should Texas legislators spend. It's not my intent, our panelists may not agree with me, and they may get into a lot of numbers, but it's not my intent to regurgitate all of the numbers in the budget from last session, but to give some parameters, give us some ideas about why they fund at certain levels and why they don't for certain things, or we can get as detailed as they want to get there, but it's more of an overview rather than dealing with all of the numbers that might bore you and put all of you to sleep. We're glad to have our panel here today. Let me get my paper here. We got to my right is Representative Donna Howard, first elected to the Texas House of Representatives in 2006 and currently serves as Vice Chairman of the House Administration Committee and sits on Appropriations and Higher Education Committees. In other words, she touches nearly everything that takes a lot of money. She's a nurse, has had a lot of experience there, and actually started out serving on the Eanes School District Board of Education. Representative Matt Schaefer, elected to the Texas House of Representatives, District 6 in November of 2012. He's a member of the House Appropriations, sits on Article 3, which covers education and infrastructure, and he also was lieutenant commander in the U.S. Navy Reserves and protected us from Afghanistan when things were hot and heavy. I guess they still are over there. He's self-employed and is in real estate and law. And then on the end down there is Mike Morrissey, currently Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick's budget director and senior advisor for fiscal policy. He's held that position since 2015. You can go back to Lieutenant Governor Bob Bullock, and he served for everybody that's been in that office, plus Governor Rick Perry. After he was lieutenant governor, he made it to governor, and quite a few terms, and Mike was there with him in different positions the whole time. So he knows all about the budget structure and has helped those write budgets throughout the time. I mentioned that we're going to talk in kind of not necessarily generalities, but cover the why we spend money, where we spend it, do we ever spend enough? Are the taxpayers considered as we talk about spending money? Because, as you know, before the government gets a hold of it, it's your money. It's the taxpayers' money. And then the government swoops in, confiscates it under law that you understand, and then it becomes money that they can use, and you get a hand in spending that money because you elect these people. And so if you don't like what they're doing, pay attention to the election. We've got a primary coming up in March and a general election coming up in November of this year. And I know certainly, I'm not going to talk about the federal level, but certainly at the state level, your elected officials listen to you when it comes to spending money. The thing you have to remember is many of their districts are different. You have people in some that have a heart for spending more on education, some more on health and human service, some more on roadways. And what you see them voting on is a reflection of what you have told them. That might be overstated a little bit, but in general, I think it's pretty true on that. So I'd like to start by giving each of our panelists about no more than 5 minutes to kind of set the stage from where they sit on the budget. As you know, we write a 2-year budget. Every other year, they have 140 days to do that. There's no excuse for never getting it right because 140 days is a long time. And if they had more time, no telling what would happen. So we're looking forward to hearing their comments. We have a little bit of diversity among our panels, but the good news is in Texas, regardless of what your philosophy may be when it comes to writing the budget, I think the legislators work together both in the House and the Senate to get a product out that is good for the state and good for the citizens of the state, including the taxpayers. So with that, Representative Howard, would you like to start with a comment?
Sure. Thank you for having me here. I think I represent some of the diversity you were talking about in a couple of ways. Oh, Matt does too. Anyway, whatever.
Short hair. So.
Oh, okay. Oh, really funny. Obviously, the budget is the main thing that we do at the legislature. It is extremely important, and it requires a lot of work on our part to get the background information that we need in order to make the most informed decisions, because we are, as Talmadge said, we're there representing our district and what the people who elected us to represent them have asked us to work for. There's a lot of commonality, at least in the House, I would say, between Republicans and Democrats on a lot of the issues, as we saw this last session with public education and a real bipartisan effort to work toward putting more money into what our constituents value, quality public education, and at the same time to do something about the state's over-reliance on local property taxes to fund public education. It was a significant outcome of this legislature, this last legislative session. That being said, there are obviously some differences in how we approach this. The fact is that we have limited sources of revenue. We have constitutional constraints on what we can do with the revenue that we do have. We are constrained by a spending limit that is based on the growth of wealth in our state. We also have a pay-as-you-go constitutional limit on what we can do, which means that we can only spend what we have, unlike the federal government. But what we do here in Texas, and one of the reasons that I think it's important that we have these conversations, I know that Representative Schaefer and I talk about these things a lot, we've got to be honest in our discussion with the taxpayers about how we are funding things. Also asking you, what do you want government to pay for? How much do you think it should cost? And how do you want to pay for it? But the fact is, we are required to have a balanced budget, and we do. But it is balanced on paper with some accounting mechanisms that allow it to be balanced when there's not actually a penny per every penny that's required in the budget. So in other words, this budget that we just passed, we used, I think it was like about $5.1 billion in...
You're supposed to be the diversity on this panel, but keep going.
In dedicated funds that we collect from you, one way or another, to pay for specific things, and then instead of appropriating those dollars for the specific thing we collected those dollars for, we hold those dollars back in order to certify the budget. $5 billion. We also use, on a regular basis, a deferring of certain payments or not fully funding something that's entitled. So, for instance, Medicaid. We look at anticipated cost growth and case growth, but we don't fully fund that. And we expect that when we come back, because Texas has such a good economy on a regular basis, when we come back that we'll be able to pass a supplemental budget that will cover those costs. And that's usually around $2 billion of deferred payments to Medicaid. These are just some of the things. There's others that we do too, but these are some of the things that we do that allow us to bring to you a balanced budget but it's really not fully funded with revenue. It's funded with accounting mechanisms. So we really have to have these discussions, because I think the more you understand, the more we do our homework to understand and represent you, the more discussions that we have about that, then we can make informed decisions that reflect what's going to be best for the majority of Texans. Because truly, that's the bottom line here, I think, for all of us. We know that what we're doing, and when we create what in this case is a $250 billion two-year budget, and we can talk about whether we should meet more regularly or not. We meet, as Talmadge said, 140 days every other year, 10th largest economy in the world, $215 billion two-year budget. And we're only here on a part-time basis to provide oversight. So there's a lot to discuss here, and I just touched on a few things, but that's what came up immediately when I thought about it, and I'm sure we'll have some good discussion about some of this and others.
I want to give my perspective as a first-time member on appropriations. Not a freshman to the legislature, but a freshman to the appropriations process. And the process needs to be reformed. You know, a budget is about priorities, ultimately. And to know whether you are putting money towards the right priorities, you got to back up and make decisions to the left of when we get here in January. And quite frankly, the Appropriations Committee this session was not really involved in writing the budget. And I know that sounds like a really radical statement, but let me clarify. The base budget, which was filed, a version was filed in the Senate, a version is filed in the House. The House bill is what moved. A base budget was filed in January. At no time did we have a committee hearing where we discussed the underlying merits of the base budget. It just doesn't happen. And that came as a shock to many new people on the Appropriations Committee. We had quite a few new people this time. And that conversation didn't really happen in subcommittee either. We focused on exceptional items, and we arranged some candles on the cake and moved some icing around, but we weren't baking the cake. The cake was already baked. And those decisions are made by, Speaker's office, Lieutenant Governor's office, Prop's chair, Finance chair, et cetera. But we're not engaged near to the point that we need to be. So, I start with the perspective that it is not my money. This is the taxpayer money. And I believe as a fiscal conservative, my focus should be on spending, because spending is what matters. Focusing on, we don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. We have the Texas economy is bringing in more than enough money. We just have to apply it where it needs to go. And so you're absolutely right about the dedicated accounts. It's something that we've been railing against since I came in. It's hard to have this accounting gimmick where we double count this money in the dedicated funds. That's terrible accounting hygiene. It's just, you'd be in jail if you did it out in the private sector. We need to fix that. But more importantly, I believe that we've got to get members engaged in the process. And right now, there are not enough of us that are. And that means that we need to be paying attention. It's the oversight. They expect us to be accountable for the dollars that are spent. And you talk about, well, where can we spend less? Sometimes we don't know, because we're not, the body is not looking at that level of detail. They're looking at large numbers and pie charts, and they're not looking at program level activities. There are programs that are being conducted by agencies that there is no statutory or regulatory authority for them to do that. Now, they're doing it, and maybe some people think that's a good program, but where's your statutory authority to do it? Where it comes from the budget. When we hand them the money to do it, we just say, keep doing it. And so we've got to look at those things, and we've got serious challenges coming up. We did something very important with HB 3, was we put a 2.5% cap on the bulk of maintenance and operations dollars for public education, and that's great. But that means that the state is going to have to pick up a larger portion of that bill going forward. That's what we want. I think we want less dependence on property taxes, more dependence on sales taxes. But we're going to have some real fiscal discipline to deal with that. We need to deal with employees' retirement system, pension funds. We're going to have some Medicaid issues that come up with the federal, the FMAP and the timing of those funds. So we've got real issues to take care of. But what I want to see is the process improved to the point where when Donna and I disagree on something, that is a legitimate policy debate, and she can advocate for this and I can advocate for that. I would say, restrain growth here, she'll say cut there, whatever. But that's happening, even to the left of session starting. Because once session starts, you're really running out of time to get the budget written and into a final product that we can put forward. And so my focus is on the process. Process matters a lot. And I really can't speak to what happens in the Senate. I'm not saying anything about the Senate process, but on the House side, we've got some work to do.
Well, let me too say thank you for inviting me and a chance to talk. And I think both representatives have mentioned things that I want to try to weave into, and then we'll turn it back to Talmadge and see where this goes. But if the topic of the panel is what should Texas spend, I think in very many ways, Representative Howard touched on the two, and there are more, but two constitutional limits: the pay-as-you-go, you can't spend more than you have, and the rate of growth. The rate of growth in the state budget shall not exceed the rate of growth in the state economy. The people have already told you then, at least, what they want the upper limit of spending to be. They haven't told you how to spend whatever amount of money that is, but by passing that constitutional amendment, I believe they have said, we want the state budget and all the things that it funds, everything from public education to health care, transportation, and all the other ancillary services that are provided together, to not spend more than what we think the rate of the growth is going to be in the state economy. So I think those things are important metrics about how much do we spend. Because the other piece that I think is important to this, as Talmadge said, having done this, and I started at the LBB before I went to Governor Bullock's office. I think I've done 17 sessions of doing this in some form or fashion. Worked through the process of changing from the budget system that they had prior to today's performance-based budgeting. What I would want everybody here to know is this: there is, in a 2-year cycle, very little downtime in the state's budget process. There is always something going on. Right now, it is a matter of agencies being thoughtful about knowing they are about to be asked to put together their biennial strategic plan. And from their strategic plan, which comes from some instructions that are produced by the governor's office and the LBB, will come their budget structure, the format in which the appropriation bill is laid out. One of the biggest challenges, and it's part of the reason that the budget process was changed from the program structure that they had to a performance-based structure that we have today, is even with a 2-year cycle, and there is no committee, biennium in and biennium out, there are no committee that work harder than the Appropriations Committee and the Finance Committee in the House and Senate, because they have the one bill that has to pass. The bill is enormous. It is all, unlike Congress, the state does one General Appropriations Act. They may pass another bill or two that makes it minor, a small appropriation, but for all intents and purposes, the next biennium's budget is in one bill. It has to pass. It's going to pass. So the art is not, does this bill pass? The art is just, what does it say? And maybe some of, what does it not say? That's important because people who want to make changes to whether it's ultimately the final spending level, whether it's ultimately judging, was the money spent in this area better spent, more accountably spent than money in that area? All those things are, to your point about, but they're backed up. Those conversations are going to be starting February, March, and it really starts when agencies have to submit a budget request. Again, after the strategic plan, agencies submit a budget request. That budget request is a stylized document as well. Again, crafted. The content is the agencies, but the style and the format is dictated by the LBB and the governor's office. Not for the sake of either of those entities trying to do anything other than to have a standard process that aids in analysis so that any of us can look at the LAR, the appropriations request, from the podiatry board or the Department of Human Services and read it the same way because we know how the format in which it's structured. So it is a lot of work that goes in on the part of agencies, on the part of members, on the part of member staffs, on the part of constituents, on the part of advocacy groups. And I just want everybody to know as we talk about this moving forward that the representative is absolutely right. What happens between January and May is important, and it's the final crafting of this. But that introduced bill, I used to, when I was at LBB, and I don't go through and do this calculation every time, but two factoids might be useful to you. One is, when I was at LBB, that introduced bill that the representative talked about probably accounted for, if I did 2 or 3 of them over there, probably accounted for 95, 96% of the available revenue, of the forecasted available revenue. So it wasn't that the members couldn't change those things during session because they can. But it's a lot harder to change, but to take money that's allocated to this function and move it someplace else, that's a much bigger challenge than to take unallocated money and put it towards whatever function you're trying to help. So most of that money is allocated in the introduced bill, and I think the history of that is that in the past, members as a whole seem to believe that that was a better path to give us a start and we can make changes. But you can certainly do it. You can certainly do it other ways. So, I mean, I think that's maybe the factors the 3 of us have gotten out now about what should we spend and how does the process affect that. So,
thank you all. Representative Howard mentioned some constraints that we have on the budget. One of them being the increase in the economy, and it's judged by the anticipated increase in personal income, but it's projected. You notice I said increase, anticipated. We at Texas Public Policy Foundation have, for at least 3 sessions, maybe a little longer, have been advocating for, instead of estimating what we think the personal income is going to be, is to go to the previous 2 years and look at the percent of population increase and personal and in the economy. Growth. So the question I want to ask is, whichever one of those you use, does it really matter in writing the budget as far as those? Because the controller tells you how much money he's or she estimates you're going to have, and it's still, just like the budget, it's an estimate. The anticipated revenue is an estimate. And so do either one of these restraints that's in the Constitution and in general law, just one of them is, the other one is something that we anticipate, we'd like to see. But do either one of those make much difference in what the final number of the budget is? I'd like to get y'all's comments on that. Whichever one wants to start may start.
I don't know if it matters in the end product as much. It should. I will tell you why I like population growth plus inflation number, right. Because I can explain that back home. I can go to my Rotary Club and I can say, my goal is that state government doesn't grow faster than you do. What do I mean by that? People understand inflation and people understand population growth. They do. It's pretty simple to understand. And so I say, when more people are driving the highways, we have to build more highways. People get that, right? So if you talk about population growth and you talk about inflation, things costing more, they reflect that in their own lives. And so I think it's explainable, and it's a way to translate that into what happens with the budget. The problem we run into is one of who's got the right numbers. And sometimes, we have maybe a conflicting methodology between the LBB says the budget grew by this, Texas Public Policy Foundation says it grew by that. Well, who's right? And so, maybe we can talk about coming to more of a common methodology at some point would be helpful. But government should not grow faster than the people around it, than the people that we're serving. And so I think population growth plus inflation is a way to express that and translate that into meaningful spending increases in state government as needed.
I think that makes rational, reasonable sense, but it's not looking at the realities of some things, I think. And Talmadge knows that we do this every single panel about from my perspective, correcting the mathematics here, that when you're talking about population growth and inflation, the inflation, it's got to be a multiplier and not an additional computation that's addition, because you're talking about inflation affecting the current population as well as the new population. It's a compounding effect. It's not addition, it's a multiplication effect, which gives you a bigger number. And that's one of the reasons why I have concerns about being, looking at something that's not mathematically accurate, in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of people who do math. And so there's that. But of course we want to look at our ability to pay. We're not looking at, let's go out there and try to spend money that we don't have, or put people in a precarious position where they're racking up a bunch of debt for things. But I think if you think about your own family income, yes, you want to live within your means. And we, as stewards of your taxpayer dollars, need to help us as a state live within our means. It doesn't translate, though, exactly that things are always status quo and exactly the same. Things change in our society. There are added costs to things sometimes that weren't anticipated. There sometimes is a new way to do something that will ultimately save us more money. There is investment in infrastructure or deferred maintenance type things that can eventually bring a better return. TRBs that we use for paying for higher education facilities. We've been using these tuition revenue bonds instead of looking, as was proposed by one of our Republican senator colleagues at one point, using some of our economic stabilization fund, our rainy day fund, some actual cash to pay for this, invest up front, and save a bunch of dollars in the long run. This is, to me, not about having a conservative budget. It's about having a responsible budget. It's about looking at what is the best way, the smartest way to use the money that we have. For example, the Economic Stabilization Fund. We did do some things this session to change a bit of that. For a long time, we were virtually, for up until now really, virtually stuffing those dollars in a mattress, not even keeping up with inflation. That is ridiculous. That is not smart. We could make money off of money. We came into this session with $15 billion projected in the Economic Stabilization Fund. $15 billion, because it has become sacrosanct over the past several biennia to somehow not touch it, when we had unmet needs. And it was not even making any money for us. So we did make some changes this time. They're small steps forward, in my opinion, but we're still going in the right direction. We are now going to invest a certain percentage of the Economic Stabilization Fund at a conservative and prudent way, but to at least get a return on our investments that meets inflation. And then to have that money that we make off of that available to pay for some things. A lot of us have suggested our underfunded liabilities. That's one of the ways that we could get an ongoing fund, a perpetual fund in place to help us cover pensions, to help us cover deferred maintenance, things like that. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, yes, I think that we have to have numbers that we agree on, and then we have discussions about what we think the priorities need to be. And I totally agree with you there. That is where Matt Schaefer and Donna Howard should be talking.
So let me tell you how to do those TRDs.
Wait, we're not there. Wait, we're not. We got to get the numbers straight first. No, but seriously. When we say you get different projected numbers from LBB and TPPF and maybe even other groups, there ought to be some way that we can agree upon how we do our math and what the numbers actually say. We know that we can manipulate things. I get that. But I can tell you that, and I think you would agree with me, Matt, that in appropriations in the House anyway, we basically, typically, most of the time, came to agreement on numbers. We may have then had some discussions about different ways to do it, but it is possible. It is doable. I think the Appropriations Committee in the House is one of the most functional places you will find in the legislature. That we have 27 members, bipartisan, who work their tails off to get the information that's necessary to make decisions, and we work together. It's the best bipartisan committee, I think, in the entire legislature. And we do need to get some commonality on those numbers, but I have a problem when we look at things as black and white and don't recognize the nuances. And I do think if you think about your own family's budget, you'll recognize there are times when things change. There's times when you decide you want a computer and not a typewriter. There's times when you may have some surplus dollars to work with, and then you talk about, well, where do I want to put those right now? Maybe they're not going to be ongoing dollars available, so how can I best use those right now and not encumber too much debt in the future? Do I want to go ahead and pay for that leaky roof? Do I want to go ahead and give my high school senior a college prep course so that he or she can qualify for a good university? Do I want to put some in my savings account for when times get bad and I want to be able to have something to fall back on? Those are the discussions we need to be having, I think. And that's where we do talk about our different ways of looking at this perhaps, but to me, we haven't started at a common base yet because we've been clear, in my opinion, underfunding things for years. And if you look at inflation and population growth, if you look at adjusted dollars, the budget we just passed, even though we put significantly more dollars in it, compounded, adjusted dollars, it's a decrease. It's a decrease. I think it's like 1.5% less money in adjusted dollars. And if you take out the property tax swap that we did, and you just look at what we put into programs, it's an even greater decrease. We're not over there spending liberally. We're actually spending less than. And I'm not sure we're investing in the things we need to be investing in. That's the discussion I want to have.
Mike?
Well, I think the question of, do those two spending limits make a difference? Do they affect behavior? And I think the answer is yes. Most often, the pay-as-you-go limit is what is going to catch you. The limit that you cannot spend more than you are projected to have. I've often said the hardest job in state government, leaving aside the people who are doing casework, because there are thousands of those who have a difficult job dealing every day with whatever people they're doing casework for, is trying to estimate the state's revenue some 30 months in advance. And that's what the state's revenue estimator is asked to do. Tell me how much money we're going to bring in next month. Some of us get pretty close to that. But they're asked to go 30 months out by the time it's time to certify a budget. So really tough job. On the other hand, the limit that talks about the rate of growth in the economy that now is talked about in terms of personal income, that there's the argument about if the pay-as-you-go limit catches you most of the time before the other limit takes effect, is the other limit much of a limit at all? And is it based on the right factors? Is personal income a better factor than population and inflation? And I think you've heard a good argument as to why population and inflation is certainly easier to understand. So the last thing, that limit can be exceeded by a resolution. Makes the members vote to exceed the resolution, or vote for the resolution to exceed that limit. It's happened once for property tax relief, and never since. So it makes a difference, at least in this case. You will have, because of cyclical natures in the economy, you will have the time when you will have more money on the pay-as-you-go. The revenue's been great the last year, so in addition to whatever was appropriated, you're going to have some ending balance, and you know what? You're going to have even more money than that. It looks like for the next 2 years, you're going to have a lot of money. Then I think that limit on rate of growth has an effect to the various thing that Representative Howard talked about. It's, whether it was in our personal lives, it was you come into some one-time money, however that happens. You can use that wisely, or you can use it to get yourself in trouble. That second, the inflation and population limit, is a way to say, let us be mindful of how we use this money. Let us not exceed this limit or put us in a spot that builds a base that we can't continue. Because part of this process every time needs to be, we need to look for the things that we did last time that we don't need to do again. Or we need to look for opportunities to, have never been of a mind that spending in every agency needs to go up every time. I'm aware that there's population growth, and I'm aware that there's inflation. I'm also aware that services and demand for services change. Technology provides opportunities to do things at a lower cost. So those are all things that the hours and hours and hours that people spend on these committees doing that work, those are all the things that get talked about. They're not always easy to resolve, but they're all part of that. They're all part of that equation.
There was a particular bill, or maybe a couple of bills, Representative Schaefer, I think you and Senator Nelson had an issue that you each had a bill on, talking about how the budget was structured and whether you have zero-based budgeting or not. Could you just give us a few comments as to why you all put that forward?
So thank you for asking that question. This session, we did something good towards fiscal stewardship. We passed a law that says for all those agencies, state agencies that are going through the sunset review process, if you're familiar with the sunset review process, which looks at what and why an agency exists and why it's functioning. But that process hasn't looked at in depth at how much they're spending. So what we said is we're going to take kind of what's been a process before, the strategic fiscal review process, and we're going to make it more robust. And the actual intent in the bill, author's intent, is to do a zero-based budget recommendation, a zero-based budget report on every agency that's going through sunset review. And that process has started. My office and several others have been working on engaging on that. And so that we're actually going to present a report back to the legislature in September that says, we've looked at programs and activities and worked with the agency and hopefully come up with a really rigorous recommendation back to the legislature. Kick the tires, look at things you haven't looked at before. Go back to the analogy of the family. When the family runs into a budget crunch and they want to pay for something, they cannot compel their neighbor to just give them more money. They don't have the power of taxation. They go look under the cushions, or they figure out, how can I work more hours, pick up another job, sell more product, do something, okay? They don't have the power that government has to get more revenue, which is taxation. And so my first bent, but you mentioned TRBs, and I think this is a good example. You know, the universities came to us this side, University of Texas, A&M, I'll chastise them all equally, said, we want you to basically give us the ability to go get debt to build new buildings. And yet, University of Texas and A&M had this huge windfall of money from the Permanent University Fund because the oil and gas had done so well. And they're entitled to use that money, and one thing they can use it for is capital projects. And yet they came forward and asked us to do debt. And that passed the House, and I voted no, even though it included my university, and because I said, no, this is not what you do. And thankfully, University of Texas, in the interim, they have now taken some of their PUF money, and they're actually going to build some buildings. But they still asked us for the debt, okay? And so that's where I think, you talk about unmet needs. I want to first look at what you have and what you're doing. We need more rigor into looking at how money is being spent. There are programs and fees that are being charged. There's all sorts of things that we need more scrutiny on, and let sunshine determine whether it should stay or go. And a debate between us whether it stays or goes. But let's have the debate, and we need to be having that on more stuff. The budget layout, folks, it says strategy. Okay, so it takes a tremendous amount of work for members to look at the program. Well, the program might be 3 to 4 sentences of a description. You still don't really know what that agency is doing with that money. It's very difficult. And so that's why I favor a stronger spending limit, because if I don't get the pie sliced up the right way, at least the pie is not too big, right? And we can come back next time and slice it up differently. But if we leave more hands in the pockets of more money in the pockets of taxpayers, they're going to use that money more effectively and efficiently than we will most of the time. And there are basic functions of government, but you know, Donna, I've served 4 sessions. In every session since 2013, we have put more money into public education than we did the year before. I know there was a cut in 2011, right? Or some argue whether it was a real cut or cutting growth, whatever. But we put more money into public education. So Republican or Democrat, we've always made public education a priority. How much we put in and where it goes is really the argument. But there's a lot of government outside of things like public education and roads and prisons. There's still discretionary spending throughout agencies that bear more scrutiny. And I think that's what we ought to be doing as members to a greater degree.
Can I just say,
Yes.
I mean, we don't want to go off into school finance because that gets a lot of rabbit trails there. But the fact is that, yes, we have put more dollars in. We've also had a population growth, for one thing. And we have not been catching up with the cuts that we made in 2011. We cut $5.4 billion from public education, and we can debate if you don't think that that's what we
I think
did.
the fiscal size up said it was less than that. But, oh well.
Anyway, okay, so we see these, we can have these debates. But the fact is that was a significant cut to public education. And one of the ways we did it was by actually altering our formula funding and putting a percentage reduction into what we actually owed to the schools. That was a way that we could reduce it. So in other words, I guess what I'm trying to say is when you see that we have school funding formulas and we say that schools are entitled to X amount of dollars, we can also come back and put a modifier on that formula, which we did at that time to give the schools even less. But there's a lot of factors. You want to get to the bottom of things. This is a great example, I think. Yes, there's a lot we need to be looking at as to why we're spending the way we're spending, because if you look at the amount of available revenue per pupil, that has not gone up for a variety of reasons, one of which is the 2-track school funding systems that we have, where we have regular districts and we have charter schools. And charter schools are public schools. And I'm not going to debate the good and the bad of charters. That's a whole nother discussion. But how they are paid for is very, very different, because charter schools don't have a tax base. The state pays 100% per pupil with charter schools, and has been actually up until now paying only about 30-something% per pupil for your district schools, which educate probably, at least prior to this year, 94% of the students. So a much larger portion of the increase that we have been seeing has been going to charter schools, which were educating about 6% of the students in Texas. There's a lot of factors here, and to your point, understanding it and diving deep to get at those nuances is important. What we were talking about a little bit before we started here, though, was from my perspective, and I think we heard Mike talking about a lot of the process is already going on. LBB's doing things, the agencies are doing things, they're even having to look at an exercise where they have to come in with a certain reduction in what they would have in their budget. There's a whole lot of stuff going on. There's boards of review. There's all kinds of hearings that we can come to, but they're not part of the appropriation process per se in terms of members being involved. I don't know how we do that with a part-time legislature. I don't know how we continue to have citizens that we want to have a citizen-driven legislature and have citizens go back home and live under the rules we created and the laws we passed, and yet do all of that oversight throughout the interim. Somehow, it just doesn't compute to me that there's got to be, and I live here in Austin, you can have all the meetings you want and I'll come to them. I'm here. But there are people in El Paso and in the Valley and all over the state and where you're coming from. And you're willing to do it. There's a lot of people who may not be able to do that unless we have more of a full-time legislature, or at least have a legislature that meets every year and is not projecting 30 months out what the revenue is going to be. So anyway, I just had to respond a little bit. Sorry.
We could simplify the accounting if we just cut the check to the parents and let them go where they want to go. But that's okay.
Well,
That's another subject.
Well, yeah, let's not debate that or
Whoa. Okay.
get into these other debates. Mike, I have one question that you might be able to spread some light on. Here at TPPF, when we compare the budget growth, we look at the appropriation from the previous session against the appropriation from the current session. As I recall, LBB looks at the appropriations from the previous session plus spending, which would include the supplemental bill, against what's appropriated this session. Can you give us some insight on, is one more accurate than the other from your opinion, or is it a matter of, we say that what we're doing is apples and apples and what LBB is doing is apples and oranges. But I'd like to get your take on what you feel like you've had experience up and down the line, what you think may be the appropriate way to measure increase.
Well, the challenge is one of timing. And so to me, it is always better to measure expenditures. An appropriation is an authorization to spend. It doesn't matter if Chairman Heflin is authorized to spend $1 billion. If he spends $7 billion, then I'm concerned about the $7 that he spent. What did he do? And I'm curious how he had $1 billion worth of authorization and didn't use it. But I may be happy about that. I don't know. But he spent. That's the point. Appropriation is an authorization, expenditure. But at the end of every session, the first time you know what the legislature did in May is by what was appropriated before a dollar of that's ever spent. And so it's a challenge in interim times, it's a challenge to figure out what the right comparison is. I'll stand by, in the absolute, it's always more important to me what was expended than what was appropriated from watching out for a taxpayer standpoint. I want to know what was expended. I'm concerned about what was appropriated, but not as much as what was expended.
I will resist debating that with you, but because our time has come to the point to where, well, I thank you for that clarification. It's the more fun time of the panel now is let's see if we have any questions from the audience. And I would like to ask you, when you are asking your question, that you do ask a question rather than making a comment, if you would. Over there.
So the question is given that the state's responsibility is to fund public education, I mean, that goes back to our Constitution, would the compromise between the two of you representatives be that we, quote, sunset how we can justify 1,250 school districts for 150 state representatives, when the responsibility to fund public education efficiently in the Constitution begins with the representatives, and before the two of you are elected, and bless you for taking on a full-time job with a part-time salary, or not even a part-time salary, but that begs the question, because no one has ever answered the question, is how is it that we justify the inefficiency of public school administration, where I know that your heart is in the classroom? How do we justify 1,250 school districts? And this sunsetting that Matt, you were referring to, or excuse me, Representative Matt, I don't get it. 1,250 school districts, and in Bexar County, where we are home to the inefficiency of wealth discrimination, we have 17, and nobody questions why we only need 10 reps, but we've got 17 school districts.
Have you ever been to a Friday night football game? You know, that's a simplified answer. Yeah, I know you could still have different football teams, but there's no question that is, you know, on paper. Just the political will to do that doesn't exist. But let me make you, let me tell you something that is possible. There's nothing stopping school districts in the same geographical area from collaborating to buy bus tires, from doing maintenance programs together, buying software together. There are efficiencies that could be done with local leadership at local levels. Some of the colleges do that. You'll see the junior colleges actually participate in some buying consortiums and things like that. And I know there's certain lists, but the degree of spending efficiencies that could come into place between school districts, I don't think there's anything in law that's stopping them from voluntarily doing that.
There's no incentive. We'll agree on that.
Well, I was just going to say that actually this has been looked at, and the bottom line, I don't remember what the study showed, but it wasn't a huge amount that would be saved. But the fact is, as Representative Schaefer is saying, a lot of the school districts do have co-ops where they are combining services and administrative functions, whether it's through their education service centers or whatever, to where they do have some of these economies of scale that they can get. And to his point as well, these oftentimes are, of course, the hub of a community, the major employer, and so it is something that a community feels very strongly about. The representatives who, now you're not talking about Bexar, obviously, it's not quite the same thing as you're talking about in rural areas in particular where you see more of this, but it has been looked at. It's been determined that consolidation of school districts is not as big of a game changer as some thought it would be. I don't have the details of that. I'm certainly happy to try to find that and get it for you. But I agree, too, that there are a lot of them that are already trying to do some of these coordinated efforts through the education service centers.
This lady right here.
Oh, lady.
The lights in our
Yeah,
eyes.
the lights are,
It's because of the lights.
yeah, the lights are,
I can be a gentleman, too.
It's right in our eyes.
Last session, the legislature passed SB 2, which puts growth limits on cities, counties, and school boards as a way of putting a stop to their out-of-control spending. Is that not a reasonable option to put on the state as well, just a percentage growth limit, the same as you've done for municipalities?
I think we do have some constitutional growth limits and the pay-as-you-go limit. Those do exist. We do have those basic constraints in place now. There was some discussion about tightening that, whether the existing limits that we have are meaningful or not. So the short answer is yes, but debate as to whether that's effective. I might say that's not as effective as it should be. Donna might say fund where it is. I don't know.
You know, there's a whole lot to what you ask, and I don't have an easy answer there. Probably you and I are going to disagree on some of this, but the fact is that a lot of the concern people had about the rise in property taxes was much more a result of what the legislature had been doing, in that over 50% of your property tax bill is for maintenance and operation of your schools. And we had been allowing the property taxes to continue to increase with the increased appraisals and shirking our share of the responsibility there. When I first came in 2006, the first major thing I had to do was vote on the property tax swap that we did back then. And it was a $14 billion property tax swap to bring our property taxes down from $1.50 to $1. Huge change there, huge change. But most people didn't see a whole big change in their tax bills because of the values going up. And then as the values continued to increase, because we didn't put any kind of a compression in place, the property values kept going up, and then local taxes started going up again, and people's taxes went back up again. My point being that there may be some inefficiencies and overtaxing by some of the local jurisdictions. I'm not going to say there's not. But at the same time, the biggest problem with our property taxes was what the state was doing with school finance. That makes a big difference. What we just did now to try to change that is going to have more of an impact on your tax bill than anything your local jurisdictions are going to do, because that was the bulk of it. Also, I would have to say that we've pushed a lot of the services and programs off onto the local jurisdictions, and somehow, and then again, we can decide whether or not we want our local communities to provide these things or not. But we now have, again, the largest number of uninsured people in the state. We have a growing population now, again, of uninsured children, twice the number in Texas as the nation as a whole. Somehow these services have to be provided. The state's been unwilling to expand Medicaid. Those services are being provided by your property taxes at the local level. You know, some of us would decide, I guess, perhaps decide that we don't want to pay for those people to have health care. I'm not one of those. And so how do we do it? And how do we do it so we're not overtaxing and overburdening any one segment of our community or over-relying on any particular source of revenue? And we have been really constrained in this state because we have been over-reliant on property taxes to pay for a lot of things, and we have one of the highest sales taxes in the nation. What was being proposed this last session, increasing sales tax instead of property taxes, would have made us equal to number one, California, with the highest sales tax in the nation. We don't have an income tax, and we just had a constitutional amendment that just made that even harder to ever have. So, okay, we're taking that off the table. We don't have many options for revenue, and somehow we have to pay for these things. We pay for educating our population. We pay for higher education, which now we're saying we have to have 60% of our jobs require some form of post-secondary education. We have to have workers that are healthy, that can go to their jobs. All kinds of things that have to be paid for, or we don't. And we suffer the consequences, as we are now, with having a growing uninsured population. Those are people that will either need to be paid for locally or will be too sick to go to work, and somehow they're going to be dependent on the state to take care of them. There's got to be a way that we can talk about this rationally and reasonably that makes sense, to where we don't just have it this way or this way. I just think there's got to be more of a discussion about how can we do this that meets both of the things that you and I are talking about.
Mike, do you have any comments on that? It's okay if you don't.
No, that's not much I can add to that.
There was somebody over here, I'm not going to say whether it was
I can assure you that I'm a male.
there's still that light's there.
I understand. I've noticed that in the discussions here, everybody seems to be focused, except I think Representative Schaefer, on budget growth. And everybody wants to talk about how we can grow our budget. And actually, I think Mr. Morrissey also talked about the reduction. But why is it that we have this focus on growth of our government, which is the same as revenue? There's no difference there, whether you want to talk about revenue or government, when we really, I think, as a nation, are over-governed. So can you explain to me why you are focused on growing the revenue and growing the government involvement in our society?
Let me take a shot at that.
We have, at TPPF, we will be floating an idea about a Liberty budget next session, or in the interim for next session, that will allow the discussion to include reducing the cost of government. We have, I guess, stepped into that same trap here at the foundation simply because when you have a growing population, it's hard to get the ear of the legislature to talk about reducing spending. And so we have looked at, okay, how can we restrain the growth and then get into maybe reducing the budget? So I'll let our legislators address that.
I would say that it is that whatever mindset that exists in state government, it is a reflection of the citizens we serve. Asking for government to grow is a bipartisan effort. I've seen it. Whether it be regulation, I have Republicans come in my office ask for more regulation. I have Republicans come in my office and say, we need you to create this new program. We want workers for our small business association. So we create a grant program so that we can have employees who are apprentices. Okay? Those are Republicans asking for that. So it is a mindset that is permeated throughout government. When I go to Retired Teachers Association, you know what they talk to me about? They don't talk to me about cutting government. When I go talk to state employees, they don't talk? They talk about their pensions. Okay, so there is, to the extent state government grows, it is a reflection of people and the interests that are electing us. I'm with you. My heart is to go the other direction. Private sector can 9 times out of 10 do a better job and do it more effectively and more efficiently, and it's their money to begin with. But it is a bipartisan issue.
And thank you for that, Matt. I would say, too, an example from you when we were on appropriations was the need that you saw in your community for mental health services. And certainly that was something that the entire state was talking about this time. We had a lot of effort to try to put some more money in to address some of the deficiencies that we had, and especially in our schools and higher education, to have more mental health available. I don't know how to answer that other than to say we probably look at things just through with different lens here, and we are representing our constituencies and our districts when we come here to work on things. I come from the perspective that we are interconnected and that we are dependent upon one another. I don't mean dependent in that sense, I mean interdependent. That what happens to the least of these happens to all of us, and that we are better as a society when we lift each other up and when we allow people to come to realize their highest potential. And there are many challenges in our society right now that people are facing. And there's a lot of concern that some of us have about the lack of adequate health care. We have one of the highest rates of maternal morbidity and mortality here in our state. We have problems, if you saw the recent story about our foster youth, who are now, even though we usually have a crisis du jour, whatever we're focused on a particular session because something's been going on. We worked really hard on that. But the fact is we have more kids now in state office buildings again, sleeping there because we don't have places to put them. These are real challenges, and we can choose to address them or not. It requires some investment on the part of government. The private community can do a lot and does do a lot. There's a lot of philanthropy. There's a lot of public-private partnerships doing things. But from where I come from, what I represent, the things that I see, government has a role to play here. And I want it to be something that we can have as much consensus around, and don't think that I have all the answers. I think that we have better outcomes when we are talking together about different ways that we could look at this. But that's the best kind of answer I can give you right now.
Well, I'll just say, in 2015, for example, the legislature did not spend all the money, and left several $1 billion that they could have spent but didn't. But I think what both representatives here have told you is exactly right. That the other factoid I wanted to leave with you that I mentioned earlier, so I'm glad it came around to this. Every session, if you add up all of the agency's budget requests, they will be tens of billions of dollars in the aggregate over whatever amount of money is available. So the pressure in function by function, and that's where it happens, is somebody wants more transportation spending, somebody wants more healthcare spending, somebody wants, and it's that allocation process that by the time it's why those limits historically have been so important, is historically they quit spending because one of the limits says quit spending. They still have a list of needs that, under somebody's definition of need, that somebody would like to fund. And so every time somebody can help with ideas about ways to save money, this process, at least my office and the Senate side, and that's true on the House side, there are people who are open to hear those ideas. We want to hear them because it's about responsibly spending whatever amount of money you're going to spend to get the greatest amount of those needs met at any particular spending level. So we're always open to that.
We have a hand right here, I believe.
Yes, with regard to the funding and the money and the new earnings cap for the appraisal districts, in the past they would take in the full 9% or 8.9%, which was the limit. And whether they need it or not, they'd take all the money. Now you've got it capped at 3.5%, is it? What will they do? What will they do now that they can't grow their spending every year like they used to be able to? And on a second item, if you'll take the time for Ms. Howard, I'm concerned too about the 60% that need an advanced education after high school. But if a K through 12 diploma were worth today what it was when I graduated, you wouldn't have that 60% problem. It'd be 20%.
So 3.5%, and depending on how you do the math, it's going to be closer to 4% for a lot of those local governments. They should ask their constituents, is your household income growing by more than 3.5% or 4% every year? It's not. So if the households, the families that they're serving in that city and that county don't have a household income that is increasing by more than 3.5% to 4%, what in the world are they doing spending 7 or 8%? They should be constrained. And 3.5% to 4% of spending growth for local government, I think is very modest in many respects. So, I don't know. I mean, it becomes priorities.
They'll find a way around it. Can they?
Can they find a way around the 3.5%? So, that doesn't really kick in till next year. So some of them have taxed at a higher rate as they are still allowed to this year in order to save up and shore up for when they're not going to have as much. I don't know. It remains to be seen what's going to happen with that. And I don't know what the other workaround that might be, but...
I do. I think what you might be hitting on is, for instance, a city may simply raise their water and trash fee.
Oh, well, yeah.
Okay? So that doesn't count as a tax. It's a fee. So they can't raise your rate that they set for the ad valorem against your house, but your trash pickup can go by $10 a month. So the answer is yes. They can go around it. And that's where the balance of power comes in. It is ultimately a local government. So the state government has given the taxpayers another tool, okay? And we've added some transparency pieces into that local property tax formula as well. So ultimately, government belongs to those who show up. And if people are not showing up at city council and they're not showing up at the county commissioners and not bending their ear, then I don't know what we can do. I mean, short of taking it over, you just can't.
There may be, I may be confusing this with something else, but I believe they can exceed that by a vote of the people.
Oh, yeah, they can.
Yes.
Yes.
So that's a workaround that they have available to them if the constituents want to do that.
Right, and there are challenges, I think, that some of them see, though, with being able to fund some of the services that currently exist, and whether or not they're going to be able to meet the needs, especially of fire and police officers, and the kind of their pension funds and all those kinds of things that they have to be taking care of. And then, of course, the healthcare costs, as I talked about a while ago, have been pushed, more of those costs have been pushed onto the local jurisdictions because the state is not doing it. And in fact, we're getting ready to lose some of the federal money that we have been counting on to the tune of billions of dollars when the 1115 waiver goes away. So there's going to be even more medical costs that are going to be pushed off onto the local communities. And just real quickly about the education, I will just say about that, I don't know how old you are. I know 74. 74? Well, okay, I'm 68. I'm in the same general category of time. And yes, we had a great education. Things have changed in terms of our demographics right now too, though. And we have more and more people attending schools who have limited incomes. So the fact is that as we have 60% of the students in this state are considered low income, and they have greater needs. We have a growing population of limited English-speaking students. And you don't have, whether or not you agree with why we have all of those, the fact is that that is who lives here. And if we don't have a way to help educate those folks who need it to be able to contribute to society, they will be more of a drain on society. It is only going to be helpful if we have educational attainment by the demographics that are growing faster than yours and my demographic.
Representative Howard, you get the last word. We're out of town. We're totally out of time. I want to thank all of you for being here and participating. I think hopefully you've learned something about the budget process, and you can interact more effectively with the legislature because of that. If you would, please thank our panel for being here today.